everyone. My name is Joyce Raimondo, and I am the Education Coordinator at the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton, New York, in an area called the Springs. And I am sitting in Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner's barn today. Today we have a special presentation called Picture the Divine. And I'm going to ask today for all of the participants on Zoom to share your thoughts about some of the images that I show, and also to weave in some of your own thoughts about spirituality if you would like to do that. And our talk today focuses on how modern artists communicate their individual spiritual ideas and how we can communicate this idea of the divine through visual language. And of course, it's as varied as it is the many different spiritual practices that people have. Okay, so we're going to start today's talk with a painting by Thomas Cole. And this is actually before modern art. This was painted in 1845. And what you see here is a view of the Catskill area in Upper New York. And Thomas Cole had a purpose to his painting of the American landscape. He wasn't just trying to paint beauty. His paintings had a moral message in them. In fact, he would sometimes actually accompany the painting with a text to explain the moral messages, okay? So before I tell you what some of his ideas are, can somebody please unmute and tell us, what do you see in this picture? Who can describe it? Just literally, what do you see?
It's very serene, I feel, because I feel that there's no ripples on the water. And I like to look at the clouds because there seem to be light and floating. And yeah, it's just, it would be a nice environment for me to be in. I'm not afraid of the wilderness, so to speak. And yeah, I think I quite relate to that, this scene.
Very good. You mentioned a few really key ideas in this painting. One of the ideas is the idea of which he calls silent energy of nature, the idea of repose, of peace in nature. And that's also sometimes referred to as the sublime, where you go into nature and you have this awe-inspiring experience, right? And just to contrast, before Thomas Cole, there was a notion of the sublime as being very active, like an active waterfall. So Cole brings in this idea that when you go into nature and you still your mind, right, you can hear the voice of God, so to speak. And you also mentioned, well, I'm not afraid to go into nature, which is actually a really key point to this type of painting, because historically, nature was considered dangerous, right? If you think about fairy tales, nature is a dangerous place to go, right? It's away from civilization. But in Thomas Cole's time, nature becomes a place where you go for respite and to be spiritually uplifted. So when people went from New York City to the Catskill Mountains, they were actually going for moral purposes to elevate their spirit. It wasn't just strictly recreational. So Thomas Cole imbues his painting with symbolism, and there's a specific way to read the painting. And the symbolism has religious meaning to it. So for example, we see the tree on the left, which is severed, right? And then we see another tree behind it, which is fully grown. So here Thomas Cole is pointing to the idea of the cycles of life. You might even say resurrection. You have the still water of the lake, and it is mirroring the sky above. So this is the idea of being on earth, right? We want to mirror the heavens. We want to live a spiritual life, right? And then we have the mountains. And the mountain is a symbol of ascension, right? But also grounded. It's grounded in the earth, but what are we here to do? We're here to elevate ourselves, to go upward to the heavens. And then, of course, this iconography can get very complex, which we're not going to go into today for the sake of this talk. But I want you to contrast this painting of nature with Jackson Pollock's famous drip painting, Autumn Rhythm. Now, Pollock has a completely different approach to his painting, obviously. First off, he's not painting nature that's outside of himself. He's not painting something that you see. Where is nature coming from in Jackson Pollock's painting? It's coming from within, right? It's his energy, his life force moving through him directly through the paint onto the canvas. In fact, one day, Hans Hofmann said to Pollock, well, why don't you paint nature? And Pollock responded, I am nature. Nature comes through him. It's not outside of himself. Also, unlike Cole's painting, there is no one way to look at Jackson Pollock's painting. He's not going to instruct you as to the meaning, because Pollock and the other abstract artists want you to have a direct, intuitive, individual experience of the painting, right? So you get to derive your own meaning. And perhaps this might even move you spiritually or emotionally or activate your imagination. So the way you look at modern art becomes highly subjective. Does that make sense so far? So my talk today, I'm going to show you specific examples of how we get from this to this within 100 years, okay? And of course, here's Jackson Pollock doing his famous drip painting techniques. He says the painting has a life of its own. I try to let it come through. So Pollock's approach to painting, it's not a didactic approach. It's not an analytical approach. It's intuitive. It's as if the force of nature is moving through him. And he has to trust the process and surrender to the process, right? One mark leads to the next. And Pollock was actually inspired by the Navajo sand painters of the West, but he happened to see them at the Museum of Modern Art doing this demonstration. So what does this have to do with Jackson Pollock? Any thoughts on that?
Well, they're working on a large scale on the floor, which reminds me of Jackson Pollock.
Yes, very good. In fact, Pollock said, I work from all four sides, similar to the Indian sand painters. And many people believe that Pollock's interest in Navajo art goes further than just the technique. These Navajo sand paintings were sacred ceremonies of healing, right? And Pollock, although he wasn't interested in conventional religion, and he was actually brought up in a non-religious home, his parents were atheists, he did have a, you might say, a spiritual quest for meaning in his life and healing, right? And going within to heal himself. So he looked to, one source was this Navajo art, which he did grow up with, by the way. He was born out west, and he came in contact with a lot of art by indigenous peoples. So here's Lee Krasner. And Lee also had a spiritual journey, as we all do. Lee was born in Brooklyn to a Jewish Orthodox family. And they expected Lee to have a traditional role as a wife and a mother. And Lee recalls reading a prayer translation and thinking it was indeed a beautiful prayer in every sense, except for the closing of it. If you are a male, you say, thank you, O Lord, for creating me in your image. And if you are a woman, you say, thank you, O Lord, for creating me as you see fit. So Lee, especially for her time, right? This is 1938, she saw her role as a woman in an unconventional way, right? And many of the artists, it's so interesting, this idea when you go on a spiritual quest or just a quest of being a human being, Joseph Campbell calls it the hero's journey, right? Where you find your inner truth. and you're willing to give up so much to find that truth. So Lee embarks on a career as an artist and becomes very active in the art world in New York City, and later here in East Hampton, promoting the movement of abstract expressionism. And when she moved here to the Hamptons, she worked in a little room upstairs in the house. And this is an example of one of her images that kind of mimics Hebrew writing, but it doesn't have any specific meaning to it. And I'm going to show you later on an Islamic work, which is done in a similar vein where it's Arabic writing, but you can't really decipher what it's saying. It just, it looks like writing, okay? But Lee's true sense of—
They're joined till death. That's what I'm getting.
Oh, you mean as husband and wife?
No.
What do you mean?
But what I'm thinking of inner and the outer man is like the spirit and the physical body. So they're inseparable, but in my case, I'm thinking like inseparable, but until death. I mean, and that's how I see it.
That's really beautiful, and I recognize Heba's voice. That's a major theme in world religions, as it is in abstract art. This idea that you have spirit, right, and you have the physical world of the human being, and they're two separate realms, but they're inseparable. And then in death, of course, you join, according to many religious beliefs, you join your divinity, and some religions, of course, believe in reincarnation. But we're not going, this isn't a talk about religion per se. But the idea with the painting is that you're going within, into your dreams, your subconscious, your energy, your spirit, and you're bringing that outside into the physical world. You're actually manifesting it through painting in a very pure way. And that's why, even though abstract expressionism is about individual expression, the messages actually become very universal because it's very pure and very authentic. Does that make sense?
Can I add also that I believe this quote might be a really interesting and intellectual way of expressing that for her, painting was deeply ingrained a way that she would learn about herself even, and that it was a compelling, like that this is referring to being compelled to express what's inside, and then it becomes a visual, in this instance, two-dimensional production of her expressing what she was compelled, and that's how we all get to see it.
Yeah, very good. And you use the word compelled, right? And many of the artists that I'm going to show you, there are beautiful quotes about how they were compelled to make art, right? They gave up everything to make art, some of the artists. And also many of them report how when they were making art, the joy that it gave them, the solace, right? And how it brought them away from their personal troubles, so to speak. Does that make sense? And I'm sure if you're an artist, you've had that experience, I would imagine. Okay, I am going to give an abbreviated, just quick look into the studio, and then we're going to get back to our talk. We're going to broaden it to other artists. And I do appreciate the sharing because this is a broad topic. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's a little intimidating in terms of, I don't want to make it about my personal beliefs and my way of thinking about spirituality. So the more that you participate, the fuller and the discussion will be. It will be much richer, okay? So here I am in Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner's barn studio. And the highlight of the studio, of course, is Pollock's drip painted floor, where his accidental strips and splatters fell. Because as I said, he put the painting on the floor and he walked all around it from all four sides. Now, in addition to the Native American painting, it was also practical because gravity pulled it down, right? Now, Pollock died in 1956. He was 4 years old. He died in a car accident. And after his death, Lee came in here to paint 1 year later. And I'm not going to go into depth about the artifacts in the studio. You see here cans of paint. He used house paint, basters, sticks. So he really broke new ground in terms of technique. So Lee comes into the studio and remains here for the rest of her life painting. She put her paintings on the wall, and both of them, as I said, are action painters, and her paint boldly goes onto the walls. You see her drips and splatters there. Okay, and Lee remains here, living here and working here until she was an older woman. And she also had a place in New York. And before she dies, she arranges that this would become a museum under the auspices of Stony Brook. Interestingly enough, her connection to Stony Brook comes through someone who had been a priest who Lee made friends with and then left the priesthood. And we're going to have an exhibit about that artist's work. But anyway, so the museum workers come in, they peel off the boards, peel off the paper to reveal Pollock's floor underneath, because this floor had been covered while they were both alive. They renovated the studio and covered it. So Lee never painted on this floor. Now, if we're talking about divinity, an aspect of divinity is obviously compassion and generosity, right? That's in all the major religions. And Lee did a tremendous act of service. She took her fortune of Jackson Pollock's work and she created an endowment called the Pollock Krasner Foundation, which is still active today. It gives grants to artists who obviously need money, okay, and whose work deserves those grants. So you can go to the website. I'll put it in the chat later if you're interested in that. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you some artists and I'm going to ask you your opinion about some of the paintings. I'm going to fill in some information. Then we're going to get to work and you'll share your work later if you choose to. Okay? Okay, so we're going to start, and this is not comprehensive by any means. We're going to start with Vincent Van Gogh, the potato eaters, right? So Van Gogh was Dutch, but then later, of course, he worked in France. Van Gogh started out, he was actually going to be a priest. And there were many preachers, ministers in his family, as well as art dealers. And so he was brought up with this mix, but he was very devout in the Protestant religion. And he went to Belgium to help the poor. There was a coal mine in town there where the people were really, really poor. But Van Gogh was not like the other priests. He wanted to live amongst the poor. He literally wanted to give the shirt off his back to the poor. And when he spoke, he didn't speak in a conventional manner. So he was rejected. And from there, he started actually pursuing a career as an artist. But throughout his lifetime, he didn't necessarily follow conventional religion, but Van Gogh had a very, very deep spirituality that's expressed in his art and his quotes and letters to his brother Theo. So Van Gogh said, "Be a friend to the poor like Jesus was." And this is a picture which really speaks to compassion, which, as I said, is in all religions. So what's happening in this picture here? We have the potato eaters, right? You could see they're poor, their clothes are humble, they're eating potatoes, they're gathering around this table. The environment looks a little shabby. But where is the sign of hope?
Light is a sign of hope, illuminating their faces and the dark interior.
Absolutely. And you find this in every major religion, the idea of light dispelling darkness, right? Even the smallest flickering flame, even the smallest light dispels darkness.
But I also see the light in the energy from the food, the heat, the warmth. So they have illumination in terms of light. They have food and they have warmth.
Mhm.
So there's something divine about that, even though it really is somber. When I saw that at the Vincent Van Gogh Museum, I really thought like, whoa, what? And you really explained so much. I did not know that he was studying to be a priest. This is amazing, amazing.
Yeah, and in his own time, this was quite unconventional to show this underclass of people, right? Painting was about showing royalty or beautiful scenes, impressionist paintings, not showing the people which Jesus would call cast out, right? Not the beautiful. This is not the picture of the beautiful people, so to speak. But you're right. Well, there's two things you said. One is, and this is another theme in abstract art, this idea, this is visual, right? But it's evoking another sense to you. You're actually feeling the heat from the food, right? That's not visual, right? That's a different sense. That's tactile. This is called synesthesia, where a person can actually like sort of crisscross senses and perceive one sense by experiencing another one. And this idea gets heightened as we go along with abstract art, which I'll talk about later. Some people also think this sort of points to the Last Supper with Jesus and his apostles with the food on the table. Okay, so here let's take a fresh look at Van Gogh's Starry Night. He painted this looking out of the window of his asylum. So he was looking at a real scene. He says, I experience a painting of frightening clarity in those moments when nature is so beautiful, I am no longer sure of myself, and the paintings appear as in a dream. So Van Gogh is imbuing his sense of imagination, emotion, his inner life into the painting, right? Even though he's painting a scene that is actually he's looking at. So let's just take a fresh look at this painting. What's going on here? What do you see in the sky?
Well, everything is exaggerated. And why was he in an insane asylum? I mean, I love the town and everything, but it's just like the sky is just an exaggeration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Van Gogh was in an asylum because he had bouts of hallucinations. And nobody knows exactly what the nature of his problem was. But when he painted this, he was not having hallucinations. When he painted this, he was in a state of clarity. Similar to Pollock. Pollock did not paint when he was in bouts of alcoholic depression. He painted when he was in a clear-minded state. Okay, so Heba just raised her hand. Heba, what would you like to say?
Well, it's really funny because I'm just teaching my students about Starry Night. I wanted to give a comment about why did they send him immediately, like at that time, to the insane asylum. It was because when he cut off his ear, that's how we learned about it. And also, what I really love about Starry Night, it's one of my favorite paintings. Other than we see obviously like the stars and the moon, and you can see like the light or the blur of like the luminescent going on. It's really interesting. Apparently there's like a math behind it, and nobody knew about that until like much later when people started going to travel to the moon, and like astronauts would go there. So it's really, really interesting. And I would definitely check it out. I can't really go into detail about it, then I'll be here like forever. But it's really, really interesting, and I just love this painting so much. The brightness of the sky versus the darkness of like, even though it's really dark, the city or like the town itself, but if everyone looks so closely, there's actually a church in there. Mm-hmm. But it's not the same church that would be in the town because there's like different architecture designs going on. And that church was painted based on his hometown.
Mhm.
So it's really, really interesting. And yeah, that's all I had to say.
Oh, that's
Hi,
great.
hi. This is Shelley, and I am just enthralled with this sky because it brings the wind to life. It's such an exciting sky. And in the quote that you have on the bottom, the paintings appear as in a dream, and that sky uh, uh, possibly was in a dream because the town is much more realistic, but the sky is just enveloping. It's wonderful.
Mhm. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much for sharing. You're making my life easier. No, but seriously, there's so many ways to look at this painting. And Hiva, it is interesting. Sometimes even with Pollock, people say that there are fractals, there are mathematical fractals imbued in his patterns. So how does an artist arrive at that? And there is this theme that moves through modern art and the thinking of the time, through theosophy. And it's this idea that a person can have knowledge, direct knowledge through intuitive thinking, right? You don't have to necessarily read it in a book. And I'll explain a little more on that later. Somebody had their hand raised. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would. When I look at that sky, what I think about is the cosmology behind it. The sun and the moon rotating, the stars rotating, the earth rotating, and everything vibrating.
Absolutely. Was that Shelley?
No.
Rosemary.
Oh, Rosemary. Thank you, Rosemary. Yes, and we're going to see later what becomes of abstract art, complete abstract art, is you can convey the cosmos, you can convey the vibration of the universe, and you don't even have to attach it to a picture of something, right? And of course, also the color in the picture here is remarkable. This blue, this deep blue appears in religions throughout the world and also in modern painting quite a bit. So the Virgin Mary, what color is her robe? It's this blue. And I'm going to show you examples how this appears in art. And blue is often associated with the spirit, whereas yellow and the sun is often associated with creation, right? It's a very active color. And so here you have the spirit of the sky, right? You have the bright lights, as we mentioned also in the last picture. Light is usually associated with divinity. And how does he connect heaven and earth? You have the steeple and you also have the cypress. The upward movement, the verticality, is also associated with ascension, right? This is another beautiful starry night. Here we see, and I'm going to go a little faster. Here we see Van Gogh's chapel in Vence, and not Van Gogh, Matisse, Henri Matisse. And we see a similar use of color. Of course, they were around the same area, where in France, the sky is so magnificent. It actually is kind of that blue. It's when I went there, I was like, wow, actually the sky is this amazing blue. But anyway, this is a remarkable story. Matisse was recovering from cancer. He hired a nurse and he developed a lifelong friendship with the nurse, who later became a Dominican nun. And Sister Jacques Marie invited him to design this entire chapel. Matisse was actually an atheist. He was born, baptized Catholic, but he didn't practice Catholicism throughout his life. So in this chapel, all of the elements of Christianity are explained through abstract art, which was really radical, right? If you think of most stained glass windows in a church, what do you think of? Who goes to church? Nobody who's been to a church.
Well,
You'll see images of, well, if it's a church, you'll see the Stations of the Cross, and like today is the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. It's also a patronal feast day here in the United States. So you're going to see a story, but this is no story of I don't see Jesus. I see spirituality here. I see his beautiful combination of that azure blue and that yellow, that magnificence. He's gone beyond the stories of the Bible. He's gone deeper.
Thank
And
you.
this is Shelley, am I right that yellow and blue is a favorite combination of the Dutch people? When I visited
You mean
that
France?
area, I saw a lot of houses painted yellow and blue.
Do you mean France or Holland?
Uh, maybe it was France.
I think it's France, but I'm not sure. But no, in France, yes, this blue is very popular. Absolutely. And also in this case with the chapel, of course, the colors are somewhat symbolic, right? The yellow, as we said, is a yellow of creation, and the blue often is associated with spirit. And look at the idea of ascension and rising. All those leaf-like forms seem to be floating upwards. It's a remarkable experience if you can get to this chapel. Matisse called this chapel his crowning achievement. Here he is on the left. He's actually in bed. He was so infirm. And he's drawing the Stations of the Cross with a stick. Do you see that?
Wow.
I know, I know.
Amazing.
I know. And someone mentioned the Virgin Mary, I believe. So here's a picture of Mary and Jesus. But what's so unconventional? What is Matisse doing here? What's so different than the way we usually see Mary and Jesus?
Jesus is a child, maybe 4 years old, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Good. What else? Anything else?
Doesn't he usually, like as a baby, will be coddled? But here it looks like he's standing on her hands.
Yeah, but that's a really good observation. And yes,
Right.
Typically Jesus is shown in Mary's arms, being enveloped by her. But here Mary is offering Jesus to the world, right? And he's actually
Yeah, you see the
forming,
crucifix.
you see the crucifix. So it's a picture of hope. It's a picture of resurrection, right? It's a very optimistic picture. And of course, what makes it universal? There's no face, there's no specific details in the picture, right? So it sort of, if you leave out details, it's easier for it to cross cultures, isn't it? There's no skin color, for example, right? There's no specific clothing. But this is one of my favorite drawings in the whole world. I just think it's so beautiful.
Yes.
So here we have Chagall, the creation of man. You can go to Nice to the Chagall Museum in France, and there's a room filled with huge pictures that tell the whole story of the Bible. He was also commissioned to do etchings. But this one is a narrative artwork. It tells the story of creation. But if you look at it from an abstract viewpoint, again, you see the blue, right, for spirit, for the divine. You see the yellow for the sun. And the yellow is at the top for creation. And you see this idea of the sun whirling. And this is also shown in a lot of cultures, either a spiral or even a whirling cross is often associated with that idea of spirituality and being human, right? We're moving, but at the same time, we're spirit. But what's strange about this is Jesus is on the crucifix. Chagall was Jewish. Chagall often depicted Jesus on the cross to represent the persecution of Jews, because of course he was living through World War I and II and Nazism. So you will often see this appear in his art. Here we have Jacob Lawrence, American artist, also depicting the creation. This was one of a series of paintings that told the story of creation. This is the final panel. And again, it's so interesting to me. Here, the robe depicting creation is yellow, surrounded by blue. And then how does he show those people? They're moving upwards, right? He has in the composition this idea of ascension. So even when you make a narrative artwork, you want to think about how the elements, how they're composed in the artwork, speak to the spiritual idea you're trying to convey. Also, the item on the podium is purple, and purple is often associated with spirituality. So here you can see, what if you just eliminated an image altogether and you just made a painting to contemplate blue or verticality, right? Or darkness in the case of Rothko's chapel. Why do you need an image? Can you make a painting that's created to what's the word for it? To give the viewer an experience of sacred meditation. Now, here's Hilda of Klimt, and here's where we get into abstract art, okay? And I probably put too much in this talk, so bear with me, but it was so hard for me to leave stuff out because it's all so important. But Hilda of Klimt is noted as the first abstract artist working in Sweden. So what do you see here in this image? Literally.
Pyramids. Sun.
The pyramid, and what else?
Sun.
And a circle that could look like a sun, right? So this shape of the triangle is found all over the world in every major religion. And how does Hilda of Klimt arrive at making abstract art in the West when no one had ever done that? She started off as a landscape painter. Her sister died, and she turned to spirituality, right, after her sister's death. And she actually had a group of 5 people, and they would have seances and meditations. And whatever she would hear, so to speak, not literally, but her inner voice in these meditations, she would adhere to and visualize in her paintings. So she starts to create beautiful forms like this called altarpieces. And she has a vision that these will one day be installed in a temple, a spiral temple, and she details what the temple would look like. In her own life, her art was not understood, and she didn't allow it to be seen when she inherited it to her nephew. She had in the will that he was not allowed to show it to anyone because it wouldn't be understood until later. But fast forward a few years ago, the Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan has an exhibit of Hilda of Klimt's work. The Guggenheim is a spiral museum, and it is the best-selling, most attended show in the history of the museum. So it was almost like her premonition came true. But let's get back to the art. Look at the triangles here, right? One is going upward, the other one is inverted. Hilda of Klimt studied theosophy, a philosophy which combined religion and science. And it was highly instructive about the symbolism of various shapes. So we're going to go back. Here's the logo, the emblem of theosophy, okay? So what do you see here? You see one upright triangle. That's a triangle of ascension, right? It's going upwards. The other triangle is inverted. It's the triangle moving downward. And according to theosophy, matter, right, the physical world, is the lowest level of the triangle. And as you move up the triangle, you move closer to divinity, right? The other triangle, inverted, shows how you can go from spirit to matter. Does that make sense? So what happens according to theology in the creation of the world is that we go from spirit, pure spirit, and there's a whole theory of evolution according to the theosophists. We become physical beings. And you might say we forget ourselves. We forget that we actually are divine, right? So here, the bottom layer of the triangle might indicate the masses of people, right? The majority of people who are more living a life where they're focused on the physical aspects, the material aspects. The higher up the triangle we go, we have the beings who are more spiritual. So who would be at the top of the triangle? Maybe someone like Jesus or Buddha or even the artists themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, this is Shelley. I also think that this artist was a mathematician, a lover of geometry, and everything is so very symmetrical. Every painting is symmetrical.
In this,
And
yeah.
yeah.
Some of the other ones are more organic, Shelley, but these are, yes. In art throughout the world, geometry is also often associated with spirit. Now, the circle, of course, what could the circle indicate? What does that remind you of if we're talking about spirituality? Why the circle? You see this in every culture.
Eternity or the cycle of life.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Anybody else?
Unending, just continues and continues.
Yeah, it's also a symbol of unity, right? If you think about the circumference of the circle, right? And she even has those lines, it's like spokes coming out, and every point along the circle is equally distant from the center, right? Of course, all of these meanings get very layered, but these are the two key philosophers, and well, Rudolf Steiner was also a scientist and an architect, but Madame Blavatsky was the founder of Theosophy, and she was largely responsible for bringing these ideas from ancient cultures to the West by forming Theosophy. She traveled the world in the 1800s. She went to Tibet, to India, to South America, literally all over the world. And what she found through her meditation, as well as her teachers and her sacred text, is that there's a universal energy that that unifies everything, that every cup, every person is made of the same energy. And I'm saying it in a very basic way. We'll skip these for now. So how does this impact on modern artists? Here, Piet Mondrian, he's no longer painting the literal tree, he's painting the forces that are below the level of physicality, right? The vertical, the horizontal. He's painting the aspects of a tree that are found in every single form. Does that make sense? He's not painting the outer form. And eventually this gives way to pure abstraction. Another influence on these artists was actually the Froebel first kindergarten. And Froebel taught the kindergartners not only how to read and write, that wasn't the focus of the curriculum. The original kindergarten wanted to teach these children how everything is unified. It had a spiritual aspect to it. And they would give the children these sticks and shapes and blocks and all sorts of things, but they weren't for random play. They would have children make these specific configurations. And they wanted to show children, for example, how you could take the same sticks and make a car out of it, or you can make not a car, you know, a building or a person or this, but underlying every form is made of the same parts. Does that make sense? So Mondrian actually studied to be a primary teacher. He was studying how to draw, teach children how to draw, but it wasn't conventional drawing, it was abstract drawing. And Kandinsky also went to the first kindergarten. So all of these ideas are in the air. And it's really fascinating how this leads to abstraction. Now, Kandinsky wrote concerning the spiritual in art, and he was very detailed about the meaning of color, the meaning of color as it pertains to the divine, as well as color as evokes sound. And he said in this book, he was very almost scornful of modern man and how modern man is so focused on, you know, like materialism, and how artists in the past just wanted to imitate nature and show the physical world, and people will go up to a painting and just be in awe about the way it was painted and would be lacking in a spiritual experience. So this was very idealistic for Kandinsky. He said, if we look at modern art, right, that is beautiful, which is produced by the inner need, which springs forth from the soul. And he wanted these images to stir the soul of the viewer. Does that make sense? And in the case of these circles, it was almost as if you could look at these circles and you might see red might evoke one sound and blue might evoke another sound. He said he wanted art to be similar to music, that you don't listen to music and say it has to sound like a voice or a car or whatever. You just enjoy it for the sound itself, right? And that's how he wanted art to be. But it had a very distinctly spiritual purpose. There's a name for this also. It's called synesthesia, where Kandinsky, some people think he was clairvoyant. He went to a concert and he said he actually saw colors of the music, literally. He said he saw the colors. So here this is where we get into you're looking at something, but it might invoke another sense. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Color directly influences the soul. Color is the keyboard, the eyes are the hammers, the soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another purposefully to cause vibrations in the soul.
Am I muted? Oh.
Yeah, would you
Do
like to
people
add
talk?
something, anybody? I hear some beeping.
I would like to. This is Pearl, I'm back.
Oh, Pearl, go
My
ahead.
meeting-
What would you like to add?
So this is a very interesting thing, what you said. Can imagery come out of sound? And it's very interesting what the nervous system is capable of. And I've sort of experienced this myself in ways that I could have never imagined. I had an incident recently where I was very heat sensitive. It's like you just become incredibly heat sensitive to heat, meaning even like heat from a plate of food would be too much heat. It's beyond what you're capable of. And that having that incredible sensitivity to heat, I was able to look at a stove and see the heat beyond the stove. That it's like, normally we look at a stove, you see the burner, you see the flame, you could feel it. If you get real close, you'll get burnt. But to actually have a sensation that's like seeing around it, it's just like an amazing thing. And so absolutely, someone can hear something and it can trigger their nervous system in a way that you can visualize. It's something that we're really all able to do, but our bodies usually don't become that sensitive to the environment or to the experience to bring that. But it's just something I recently experienced and wanted to share. It's like sort of unbelievable.
Yeah, well, there's a name for it. It's called synesthesia.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's now you know the name for it.
Now I know what I got.
But you know what? In the West, a lot of times these things are they might be considered a default, but it's actually a gift in some ways. Same thing with being clairvoyant or the ability to see auras, right? The ability to see what we call the sixth sense, right? In the West, those things are like frowned upon. But in the East, that's just a given that, of course, people can do that, right? So when I say the East, a lot of these principles we're discussing stem from Hinduism, yogic traditions, and Buddhism. So here we have the Whirling Dervishes. This was an Egyptian painting done by the father of modern Egyptian art. And I just love this. I think it relates really nicely with Pollock in terms of movement and action. But, you know, the Sufis, when they do the whirling, it's a way of accessing higher realms. It's a form of meditation through movement where they spin and rotate at the same time. And now, of course, sometimes it's become, and in some cases, somewhat of a performance, but the basis of it is to access higher realms. And here we have a Turkish Jordanian artist who is a mathematical painting, but done in a modern abstract way. And the idea is that when you look at this mural size painting and you walk past it, it's devised so that you can actually almost get into a trance-like state, right?
Mhm.
And she says, similar to Pollock, that she's not aware of what she's painting often until she paints it. So
Hmm.
you might say she's accessing a higher realm, right? And this one is beautiful. Iranian artist who is using his skill. He's a master of calligraphy. And calligraphy, historically, right, in the Islam religion, is a way to convey the word of God, right, in a mosque,
Mhm.
in a scripture. So Islamic art typically frowns upon representation. It's pure abstraction. But here, this artist is using this idea of calligraphy in a way where it's not as literal. You can't literally read it. It becomes an abstract form. But I think it's just incredibly beautiful and relates really nicely to Pollock. And here is Yoyo Kasama, now one of the highest selling female artists in the world. This is her infinity room, right? Where you walk into the artwork. It's an installation. You become part of it, right? And she said that she literally would see these dots, you know, in her daily life. She said, I felt as if I had begun to self-obliterate, to revolve in the infinity of endless time and the absoluteness of space and be reduced to nothingness, which sounds like a negative. But I think in many spiritual philosophies and tradition, when we meditate, even when we do art, what are we doing? We're letting go of the ego, right? We're letting go of our worldly concerns so we can get in touch with that divine vastness, right? The infinity of the divine. And she says, I fight pain, anxiety, and fear every day. The only method I've found that relieves my illness is to keep creating art. I followed the thread of art and somehow discovered a path that would allow me to live. So we're going to end on that note. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to share your thoughts. And I'm sorry, I ran over a little bit on the talk, but I'd like to invite you now, and I'm not going to instruct you. You can get out some paper, you can get out a pen, a pencil, colored paper, paint, and paint your idea of something that has to do with the divine, but without using words. You can use calligraphy if that's your tradition, but try, if you want to say, for example, love, try to find an image rather than a word, okay? And you can do it in an abstract way or a narrative way, and then we'll regroup in a few minutes and I'm going to stop talking. Carolyn, would you like to share?
Okay, I'm in the car. So let's see. You can see me, but I want you to see my work.
Put it in front of your face and then we'll see it.
Oh, you can't really see it.
Okay, so tell us about that one, Carolyn.
Okay, so I think on the screen, it's the upper left corner. You can see that's my divine, and the rays of love are spreading out through the universe. You can see on the upper right, there's the earth. On the lower left, there's the moon and the sun. And if you go from my divine being towards the center, you see hands that are like touching, and then it swirls around and there's a heart in the middle. That's my
Carolyn,
thing.
I love that. Actually, it's so funny because when I pictured making one, I was going to do the exact same thing.
No kidding.
I was going to,
oh my God.
Details, but I was going to do a spiral with a heart in the middle. And then I felt like I had to have something to represent like physical, like maybe people or hands. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And the spiral, of course, is a symbol of fertility and expansion, ever expanding.
Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Very good. That's funny. I literally was thinking the same thing.
I know, it's amazing.
And Rosemary Williams, would you like to share? Rosemary and then Heba. Okay.
Are you there?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Tell us about that one.
These circles are on the earth plane. This one is not. And this connects it all.
Very nice. I like the abstraction. So are you going to add color to that?
I think I will, yeah.
I like the simplicity and the abstraction. And let's see. Heba, would you like to share? Now, Heba used to work for the Pollock House with me, and Heba.
I missed it. I missed the Pollock House.
I know, and I'm so glad she came on now. She's in California. And Heba,
Yeah.
will you share your artwork? That's so good. Put it up so we could see.
Sure. So this is so I usually do Arabic calligraphy and Islamic calligraphy, and I had so much fun looking at the slideshow and seeing how other artists from my culture would do it and religion. And basically what I've done, I've never done abstract calligraphy, and I challenged myself to do it. And the first phrase, you'll see it here. Usually we read it from right to left, and this says, God, your forgiveness. And then like the second phrase will be, God, forgive me. And it's the same meaning, but it's just, I decided to combine them and add some like floral design, because I can't do the architecture right now, but I thought like something quick and fun, and I had fun doing this, and I limited my color palette. It's really fun and relaxing to do.
Heba, that is so beautiful, and I love the way it all goes upwards. I don't know if that's part of the calligraphy or you just designed it that way. You have this upward movement similar to Kandinsky.
Yeah, this one, it's like the A of the alphabet. So usually our A is like a long, like number 1. So a lot of Arabic calligraphy artists would use that to be like, to exaggerate it and to make it longer than everything else. I'll show you this one. So this one is the same idea. So you can see this is like our A, and we exaggerate it and put it down here. So yeah.
That is so beautiful. I love that so much. And actually it's interesting because Pollock's artwork is often compared to a form of calligraphy, right? Like, but he's not doing any specific writing. But I love the way all these different cultures and techniques come together. And I just think it's extraordinarily beautiful. And by the way, I'll send you the link to some of those artists. Those artists are selling for millions and millions of dollars. They're the top selling Islamic modern artists.
Yeah, I would love to definitely check it out.
Good.
Thank you.
Would anyone, how about Maureen McKenzie, Rupal?
Yep, that's me, babe. My picture.
Nice.
So-
Tell us about that one, Maureen.
Grounded in, spiritually very grounded in the earth and the darkness, and we start to emerge with green, and could represent growth and the grass, and move into water, and then there's almost the spiritualness of heat coming up, and then on the top is yellow, and then you have the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ here with the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the middle, in the background. And the painting that came to my mind, which I actually have on my wall or in the other room, is that picture with St. Joan of Arc, where she's in the backyard and she's with this, I think, St. Michael, and they're literally just behind, like you have to look for them hard in the wood, within the trees. And so you see that this is the image of Jesus rising up, and then the Sacred Heart there.
Oh, so the image of the Jesus is sort of camouflaged in the painting?
Yeah, exactly. similar to the picture that I'm thinking of St. Joan of Arc, where she's in the camouflage. You have to look very hard to find her, and I think it's St. Michael, but
Yeah, no, well, that goes back to this idea that, you know, in many spiritual traditions that we forgot who we were. We forgot that we're divine. So maybe that's part of the symbolism. You have to look through to see the divinity, right? You have to look through the illusion of the physical world.
and that Jesus and God is everywhere. You know, so yes, when you look at all the concepts of nature and the layers of nature, Jesus is there all the time.
Yeah. And also, we didn't mention in terms of, I was speaking about the triangle, and I forgot to mention that, of course, the triangle is also, the trilogy is used in Christianity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
Good job, Maureen. Love it. Rosemary, okay, you shared. Who else would like to share? How about Lynn? Wow, tell us about that one.
It's just like reaching for your higher power, your higher self.
And I love all your patterns that you have there. Are you going to color that in?
Not sure, maybe not.
And I like the whiteness for Kandinsky. And of course, everybody has their own ideas about these things. But for Kandinsky, white, the blankness is sort of like, you know, when you have white, you have open space, you have room for creativity, right?
Right.
So
Can I ask, it reminds me of a Rangoli art, like South Asian or Indian art, just because of the popping of the colors and the pattern itself. It reminds me a lot of it. So what I'm wondering is, was that also an influence or no?
No, not really. I don't even know who that is.
Well, it's usually in there's a holiday called Diwali, and what they would do is that they'll use sand as a temporary art or installment, and they'll do it on the floor. And they do like these amazing patterns. That's what it reminded me of. So that's why I was considering like, oh, was that your inspiration?
No.
So I would definitely check it out.
I
Good,
love
thank
that.
you.
And also, yeah, well, that also, you know, Carl Jung, who was really important in Pollock's time and still is, of course, he had this idea of these universal symbols that appear all over the world, even though people maybe across the world never interacted with each other, but there's universal ideas that spring forth. So maybe you intuited that without knowing that specific culture, or, you know, maybe you saw something else, or maybe it just springs from within the subconscious mind, right?
Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see, I want to make sure I get everybody here. So is there anyone else who would like to share, or any closing thoughts?
It was very enjoyable.
Well, I want to thank everybody, because this is not the easiest topic. It is a passion of mine. And I'll just tell you, my long story short is that I have been practicing yoga for 30 years. And initially I couldn't stand it because it was so much instructions. I felt like it was so steeped in tradition. And I would go to this yoga retreat with my cousin over there, and I was like a rebel. And I'd be like, I like modern things. I like creativity. Why are they telling me exactly where to move my leg? Like, I was just totally rebellious, but I kept going because I knew it was good for me. And it's been a revelation to find my two greatest passions, which is, you know, learning about religion and spirituality and yoga and things of that nature, as well as other traditions, and modern art really actually all come together. And it's beautiful. I did the best I could to communicate it with these broad topics. So I appreciate everybody's patience. And feel free to email me if you want to share anything that you didn't get to share, or you want to send me your artwork, okay? So, and have a beautiful holiday season. Bye, everyone.
Bye.